Before you try to change anything in your life, any bad habits, you want to get healthy, you're preparing for major life change, you need to understand this framework here that I've created. It's called the anatomy of change. This will essentially explain why people feel resistance through the whole process of change before they get to the other side, and basically how to prepare for it and anticipate it. That way you can make it through with success instead of it just being a mystery. This breaks this down. I think this is a great way for everybody to understand it. There are multiple things going on here. So the anatomy of change. The problem that people typically run into with change is that they only look at this visible part up here. Change is like an iceberg though. We have a lot that's going on under the hood that we don't see. People look up here, and when they feel resistance, they think that they're doing something wrong, or maybe that the change isn't right for them. And in most cases, that's probably not true. They just haven't given it enough time because they don't understand the timeline that change works on. Underneath the iceberg, the thing that's really controlling the behavior and the situation up here, the visible thing, is actually the three domains of change. The three domains of change are the biological, like your hardware, psychological, like your brain, and the environmental, like basically your context and the situation. This is essentially a lens for life. Like you can look through the entirety of life through the biological, psychological, and environmental. That is what creates your reality. Okay, and so at the same time, it determines basically how ingrained change is into your routine and your familiarity and what your body adapts to. So when we go to change or make a change, what we're really doing is unraveling adaptations. And to unravel those adaptations, we need to understand that we have different things going on in the biological, psychological, and environmental. So these three domains, they're not exclusive of each other, but they do work on their own independent timelines, and each of them has their own set of things that change at different rates. So that brings us into rate of change and the depth of change. And so each one of these has their own rate of change and depth of change. Rate of change is essentially the response time. So think of like thoughts. Thoughts are in and out, instantaneous. Depth is like stability. So for thoughts, it's very transient. On the other end of that, changing your beliefs, like your worldviews, that takes more time. It's slower. At the same time, it's also more stable. So each of these areas has their own things that work on their own timeline, and they have their own stabilities. So psychological is the easiest example. At the top of fast and transient, we have thoughts, instantaneous, in and out. Emotions, takes hours to days to change those. Beliefs change over the period of months and years. And then identity level change is usually something that's years for most people, if like really ever. So fast and transient, slow and stable. Let's do environmental. So for environmental, we have objects in the physical space. You can easily just take things, throw things out, bring things in. So then we have actual cues, which is kind of the same, but think more along the lines of things you can't change as easily. So maybe your route home from work or people in your environment. Then we have friends. Usually takes a while to change relationships. And then we have life structure, which is more so like where you live, your job. Friend group is still kind of a part of it, to be honest. And then at the top of this, we can have cultural. Typically people have very, very deep cultural influences, and that takes a lot more time. And before we head into biological, I meant to say that all of these things, the timeline isn't exactly, linear. But there's some things can change slowly, while some things, the same variable can also take more time, just like at different rates. You know what I mean? So it's not a perfect linear kind of thing. We'll see this specifically in biological. So neurochemical state, like basically endorphins and dopamine. I could take a nicotine pouch right now and it would change instantaneously. And not to be confusing, but this can also be very long-term, but that's more of an endocrine systemic kind of change, which we'll get into. And then you have like blood sugar and insulin, for example, which can be both instantaneous as well as kind of a week out type thing. Then we have nervous system tone and sleep architecture. These things generally take weeks to months to kind of really make a full change. So these final ones are the more slow, far more stable. Hormone changes like HPA axis, neuroplasticity changes, think dopamine, reward system, and then metabolic changes like mitochondria and all that. The biological one is kind of more complicated because these things kind of all work on both fast and transient and slow and stable. But if we're looking at really, really deep changes, these have the potential, okay, these have potential to be very, very stable changes. You can affect your nervous system immediately by, breathing and going for a run, right? And meditating. You can do that instantly. But the nervous system, if it's healthy, it can go back and forth between the sympathetic and parasympathetic easily. And if it's dysregulated, that might look more like being heavily in the sympathetic fight or flight. And to basically come out of that, you're gonna see it's gonna take weeks or months and maybe years, depending on the individual's history. Let's do an example real quick of what this looks like. We want to quit alcohol, and at the same time, because when we remove a habit, we want to replace it with something. We need our identity to be able to point at something better. We need to be able to replace that void, because when we take something, it opens up space. We need to make sure that we replace it. So let's just look at alcohol. Let's point out where most people go wrong, and then let's point out how you can improve your process to changing whatever your behavior X is. Okay, so this is just saying stop, drink alcohol. No drink alcohol. No, we got a lot going on down here. Okay, so immediately when you stop drinking alcohol, you got some biological and psychological things going on. Let's look at this. I'll just do it kind of like on a timeline here. So by the day, environment, maybe you change and throw all the stuff out. Biologically, withdrawals. Psychologically, you're maybe happy and excited, but also stressed out. Then we go into the week. Biologically, you're still probably going through some sort of withdrawals, maybe, depending on whatever your relationship is. Psychologically, you could be a lot of places. Psychologically, the brain will be seeking to go back to that behavior or some sort of relief. Environmentally, you'll probably be fighting, hopefully nothing in your environment because you got rid of it, but people and routes. So week 2, psychologically, is typically a sticking point for a lot of people, because the novelty of change actually wears off. When we go through a change, we have cortisol and all this stuff, and that actually feels like it hypes us up. So week 2-ish, things start to get boring, and so psychologically you have to deal with that. So we need to anticipate that. Biologically, you're probably feeling fucking pretty good, comparatively. Environmentally, you need to make sure that you've been setting up boundaries and you've identified the people that could be risky. So month 1, again, the boredom could be setting in, and psychologically we have identity things going on. So at that point, once the initial craziness wears off, we start asking like, who am I? What do I really want to do? So that's when we need to start. Well, we needed to start before, but we need to make sure that we're actively building that new version of ourselves, right? Step 1 is stopping. Step 2, we need to build. Biologically, probably feeling pretty fucking great, but this is still not all the way done. Environmentally, if you didn't change your social group or the places that you're hanging out at, this is actually a big danger zone in month 1. So month 3, depending on how you set all these things up with anticipating and all that, biologically you should be feeling pretty fucking good. Psychologically, you're past the biggest part of it. If you made it that long environmentally, the only thing is typically social stuff again, whether it's family or old places that you've been. And honestly, the same basically goes to month 12. The changes will be smaller, as time goes on. You'll feel better though. You'll probably be able to start feeling the full benefits around month 12, both biologically, psychologically, and environmentally. If you made all those changes to basically your friend group and the type of people that you're hanging out with and the stuff in your house and the stuff that you're doing. But you get the point. So I'm not going to do working out, but the goal in this is lasting change with no regression, right? We want to make the change and we want to make it stick. That way we can continue to grow and move on with our life. That way, every time that we invest time, energy, and attention into any of this, because change is hard, right? Change is difficult. It's uncomfortable. And every time we invest our resources into that, We want it to be successful. And every time that you succeed, and every time you do that again and again and again, those wins, they compound, right? Like, you are building yourself. Personal development is self-investment. And just like money, over time, these things, they compound, right? So hopefully this helps you anticipate some of the unseen variables that we have going on here. Because again, most people just say, you know, no alcohol, and people know like, hey, maybe I shouldn't hang out with fucking Dan because Dan likes to fucking drink. There's a lot going on. There's a lot going on. Anticipate those things, make a plan for them, and I guarantee your fucking process through whatever change you're doing, this applies to every type of change, it'll be easier. You'll get to the other side way more predictably. So, cheers.